Welcome to Board Game Academic Podcast, where we explore the crossroads of scholarship, play, and practice. I'm your host, Christopher Carbone, scholar, educator, and of course, lifelong gamer. Each week this semester, we'll discuss with brilliant minds how analog games inform real-world practices, support meaningful challenges, and help us think critically, whether in classrooms, clinics, communities, or beyond. This week, I'm joined by Meagan and Will. Hey guys, how are you?
Great, how are you?
Good.
We're doing great. I'm so glad to have you join us here this week. And obviously, there's so much to talk about, especially with tabletop gaming. And both of you have some really impressive backgrounds, both academically and professionally, and especially for our interests, using tabletop games in great ways. Meagan, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yes, would be happy to. So I am a licensed psychologist here in Baltimore. I work at the Student Counseling Center at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. Previously have been affiliated with Johns Hopkins and University of Florida, where I earned my PhD in counseling psychology. I also am a lifelong gamer. Grew up as an only child, and so have had the experience for the past, 30 some odd years of just wanting people to play games with me. And now I can do it at my job. How great. So I have the fortunate experience of a supervisor and a boss at our counseling center who's pretty lenient with trying out some new outreach ideas for getting students involved in activities that support their mental well-being. And I think playing games and having fun is supportive of people's mental health. So even if it's not directly therapy related. So a coworker and I, who also wants to play games at work and get paid for it, have been doing a series of roughly monthly short D&D one-shot events where we're inviting students to come in, take a break for like an hour, hour and a half or so, not do homework, not be stressed out, and talk to each other. Crazy concept. And it's been going great. It's been really fun. We've had a rotating cast of faces, hoping to get some people come more consistently. But I like taking my Friday afternoons off to play D&D, so that's great.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Will?
Yeah, so I'm also a licensed psychologist. So my PhD is from Texas Women's University, and my master's degree is from Loyola University, Chicago. And I've been running sort of tabletop mental health stuff for about 6 years now. So originally, I started it when I was a student getting my PhD. The story goes that I was working at my practicum site at a private practice, and my supervisor said, hey, you need to get more hours. You should come up with a group that you could do. And so I wrote up a document that was like a pitch document. Here's all the groups that I know how to do that I've done before. And buried at the very end of the document, the longest entry was a pitch for a D&D group. And she took one look at the document and said, it's really obvious that you want to do one of these more than the other. Why don't you just do that? I was like, well, I didn't think it was going to be that easy. I didn't think you'd just let me do what I want. And, we had a good talk about it and started my first D&D group, and then, haven't stopped since.
Fantastic. So I guess the first and the main question about this for practitioners out there, a lot of us are gamers, but the idea of bringing tabletop games, RPGs, is something we've always thought about, some things we've heard about from the fringes of gaming. What is it about, I guess, especially tabletop role-play games or games in general, that really benefit clients, students, people in need, different populations, neurospicy populations? Why? Why games?
Why not games, right?
And maybe to kind of answer your question, you're absolutely right, because I guess generally we've heard this from a lot of people, games are childish, games are frivolous, right? Ooh, satanic panic, games are demonic and scary. But what you're saying, games are actually therapeutic and helpful, which counters all of those kind of crazy arguments.
I think at the heart of a lot of really good therapy and a lot of really good healing experiences is connection to other people. And while there are solo games, I will, cop to that, right? Which I'm sure could also be very therapeutic in nature, right? I think like even just the act of connecting with someone in a way that's a little more structured and facilitated, right? Instead of having to be the like, I don't know how to make small talk, or I'm not really sure like what, what major are you in? Sort of questions to run through. There is a set of rules, there's a shared common goal. You can focus on something and sort of help break the ice without having to play all of those like terrible icebreakers that no one likes to actually participate in. So I think it's a really good medium for uh, fostering some of that connection that is going to be very therapeutic and like mentally beneficial.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
What
I
do
think the
you,
only thing I would add is that I think a lot about people know how to play games. People understand and like games, and there's a certain amount of trying to meet people in the things they actually like and care about, and making what we do make sense to them. It's a big ask to ask somebody to come into your office sight unseen. They have no idea what they're about to do or what they're about to talk about. That's a really hard thing to do, and some people are able to do it pretty easily, and that's really good. But there's a really large amount of people out there, I think, that don't understand it or don't get it or want it to make a little more sense to them. And so I always pitch it to people as this is a way that it might make a little more sense to people. And if they can connect with you, a person doing the work, and like was previously said with other people, it allows us to translate some of what we know works, our knowledge, the healing that goes into stuff, translate it into something that they already do. But hopefully then they can take something out of that into other game spaces, and so the stuff doesn't end at the end of the session.
well, Will, you mentioned that obviously the idea of using role play games makes sense. You and Megan have both done it in a lot of different contexts, and it's beneficial for clients. There is the concern and maybe a little pushback, like Megan said, why not games, right? Again, doesn't make sense to not include that as far as an opportunity to kind of open and explore, very much like what therapy does generally, is that exploration space and that reorganization and that referencing things in a different context now. um, I'm just wondering generally, like, what is like the procedure? Like, people want to come and they want to, take part of this. Like, do they have to know D&D stuff? Like, do they have to be well read in it? Like, is there issues or concerns or dynamics that have to be checked or worried about, or dynamics, anything?
Sure. I think there's some element of that that's true. So I do group therapy groups for people. So obviously it's usually, between 3 to 5 or 7 people around the table playing in the same game.
Yeah.
My finding, and perhaps, we might have different findings here, but my thing has been most people don't really know how to play. They aren't experts on the game. On average, in our groups that I've run, I've had one person who's ever played before or actually knows how to play the game. The rest are usually brand new, and they have a variety of experiences. Some people, they watch Stranger Things or they've watched Critical Role or something like that. But a lot of them are just, I've always been interested in this, or I know that tabletop games have existed, or I've played like another type of game. But certainly not a lot of people have an encyclopedic knowledge of the thing before they start.
Yeah, I'd say similar at my institution as well. We usually will get like at least one person who's shown up to our event being like they're doing D&D as a university sponsored event. How great! And we'll like pull out their like dice collection, and then usually there's a handful of other people who are like, I have no idea what I'm doing, and I've never played before, but I've always kind of wanted to learn. And so it's a really great opportunity to allow the more experienced students who are at our table to do some of that teaching, forge some of that connection. Also, I can disclose to the nervous people, I also barely know how to play this game. I'm also still learning, and I'm very grateful that there's someone here who knows how to do combat much better than I do. And I think there's some modeling in that of like, it's okay to not know things, it's okay to be learning. it's okay to pause in the middle and like Google how the rules work, or like which, dice am I supposed to roll at what time, right? But mostly it's just like a really fun time to encourage people to like break out of their shells a little bit.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and I guess we're seeing a, a revival of D&D and role play games generally, like you mentioned, Will, Stranger Things and Critical Role. Like it's blowing up. It's just
Mm-hmm.
Dimension 20. There's so many other areas where you're seeing it big and better ever. And Will, even your the article in the Times magazine that you're also quoted in as well. So even Time magazine is actually looking at D&D. I think was it their 50th anniversary for Dungeons and Dragons?
Yeah, it was 50th anniversary of the game, and Time did a whole special issue about it, which was really cool. But it was also a thing that I don't think most people who played tabletop RPGs would have considered that such a thing would even exist not that long ago.
Sure. And now it's widely accepted, at least generally, probably for the younger generations. The older generations are still a little more challenged by that kind of dynamic, which is strange because it's storytelling and it's play therapy just at an adult level. And again, it embodies a lot of the really positive aspects, right? You're playing traditionally, playing good characters, trying to do something better for the imagined kind of community there. And then the social dynamics are great too, because again, a lot of populations out there of neurodivergency will typically really benefit from that kind of interaction and group dynamics.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it speaks to a lot of different people in a lot of different ways too. Even if you aren't necessarily running a game explicitly to be therapeutic, I think there is something profound about playing the game by itself, which I think is one of the reasons it resonates with people, right? That you're creating these stories and these experiences that a lot of people grew up on, and now you're able to create them yourselves with people at a table. And I think also that there's something about it that is sort of transcendent of it just being the game. I think it matters a lot what's in the game and who's making it and all of that. But I always joke around with people and say, like, we're really in a golden age of these kind of games, right? It used to be there was only a couple that you could really play, and there was probably only a few people that you would know in your life that had ever played them. And now there's a bunch of them, and any kind of thing you can probably think of, there is an RPG that you could play about it, which is really cool because not everybody wants to play swords and sorcery fantasy. Not everybody wants to play anything that even has really stringent rules. So you can kind of play whatever you want at this point.
Mm. And there's the creative aspect as well. I think one of the first outreach events that my coworker and I did, we spent many, many hours creating a like inside out themed adventure that was like
Excellent.
catered to like grad students. So we had people play different characteristics that a grad student might have. So like studiousness, wisdom, curiosity, anxiety, right? Things like that. And venture through like the mind of a grad student trying to start a thesis paper, which, obviously us here are totally very studious and don't procrastinate at all and don't have any anxiety about papers that we have to write, I'm sure. But it was very fun. It was a fun exercise as the professionals, my coworker and I, to put something together that we thought would really match the experience of our population that we are aiming to like serve and connect with. And it was really fun for the students as well to be like, am having this exact experience right now, and I can have some sort of a resolution and some sort of a like, goal met, of which there are very few in grad school, very few and far between.
Yeah, it's an opportunity for, like you said, grad school and just undergrads or college in general. It's such a new, unique experience where you're encountering so many different dynamics and so many different people, different types of people you may never have come across, and exploration and experiences and things like that. And it's nice to step out of that into another world where you can still at least abstractly explore those kind of dynamics without the kind of traumatic stressors that come along with, like, hey, I'm being exposed to all of these different you know, different problematic dynamics and the stress of these classes. And, I'm leaving family for the very first time. And like, who am I as a person? And having these gigantic existential crises. And then like, you're like, well, I'm going to be in this quasi fantasy world where me as a person kind of bleeds into it a little bit. And then I'm just going, so maybe I'm playing this role and maybe I'm taking a leadership role and I'm helping other people. Maybe that's who I really am. Maybe that's a little bit more of me and something to explore out in the real world. So when I go back into the real world a little bit, I could do that. Well, one of the things you said to me, from a very long time ago, which I thought was incredibly interesting, is the type of students and people who do engage in these role play games. Because I think this historically, we assume that these are all white males that are like, oh, that's our population. We play those games. But that's not necessarily true.
Yeah, it's actually been sort of the opposite in my finding. Certainly, I have, a little bit of a limited range here because often I was working with folks that were, often maybe late teens to maybe early 30s, depending on the student group. But almost all the groups that I've ever run doing this kind of work have been majority women, majority people of color.
Yes,
I think that's one of the big things that has changed over time is like the stereotype, of course, is like dudes that live in their mom's basements playing D&D, which like certainly that still exists, but the stereotype is often quite wrong. And you expect that it's reaching out to a different group of people perhaps than you would think. Like I definitely had the perception, as you maybe said earlier, of like, it's probably going to be people who have already played before, who already know what the game is. And in fact, we end up getting much more like, younger people, people of color, women that are like, I've heard about this. I've never been invited into this space. I would love to be in that space now, right? Either because it hasn't been an option or just the people around them weren't doing it. It is really different. And I think it also allows you to do different things in those spaces, right? Because if you're making a group or an RPG for a predominantly white, predominantly male group, it's probably going to look different than if you were making a group for a predominantly person of color, a predominantly woman focused group.
yes. And Will, you mentioned earlier, and Megan, you did as well, that you don't necessarily have to play Dungeons and Dragons. There are other variations. You can homebrew a RPG, but maybe you could talk a little bit more about that. And Will, I know you have a bunch of really cool RPGs that people probably wouldn't know about from different populations and groups that people might want to take a look at.
Yeah, no, I was very fortunate that my coworker, Oscar Cortino, shout out,
Hey,
is a very creative individual who is also familiar with RPGs generally. And so between the two of us and brainstorming and sort of this like like making jokes that we thought were really funny and then being like, how can we include this in a way that seems like, vaguely
sure.
relevant to the idea that we pitched our boss of like getting people to play a role playing game together. Sort of using the structure and the rules of D&D, we're able to really put something fun together. But can really just have any sort of just like random, bit that we're like, this is really funny for us, grad student inside out, and then able to, build that out as we think is appropriate as clinicians creating an event for students, right? And being able to put our own spin on that.
Yeah, I will say I empathize with that. One of my favorite things I've ever run in a therapy group was we did a ripoff of Howl's Moving Castle
Nice.
because everybody in the group was burnt out millennials. And I was like, who's going to really speak to them? And I'm like, a really burnt out version of Howl from Howl's Moving Castle. I think they could understand that, right? So yeah, I definitely do the same thing. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff out there. I do a lot of the worlds myself for who the group is so that I kind of have the opinion that the world does a lot of the work for it, and I'm doing work being the DM. But as you kind of pointed out earlier, if I could make a world where the assumptions are different, or where the people that are oppressed are not oppressed anymore, what might that be like? But that goes along with kind of the question here of there's a lot of games out there that are written by people that didn't used to write games, or are written from the point of view of people who don't typically have games made about them.
Yeah.
I've tried a bunch of them. One of my favorites ever made is Thirsty Sword Lesbians, greatest title for any game I've ever heard in my life, easy. But it's also a good game that really comes from some experiences that a very specific group of people had in their upbringing, and then wrote a game about it, which then can be used as a system to play a game about something else, right? Another good example is Coyote and Crow, comes from sort of the indigenous American experience and sort of the, like, yeah, what if the world was different? And it's been really cool to see games sort of be responsive to what's going on in society, right? Like there was a really cool game that came out not that long ago, and it was very much like sort of, you could see it was really based and influenced by like Wakanda from like the Marvel movies, and sort of like this, what would it be like if this part of the world was different, or if this part of our society was different? And so I like the idea of using those kinds of things. There's also games that, depending on what kind of games you like to run, different people might find it differently therapeutic. I mean, one of my favorite games to run is Blades in the Dark, because it's just not super mechanics heavy, and I'm just not that kind of DM. But there's even games that are kind of built to be like, okay, if DMing, D&D is a little hard, or if you don't like the way that system is set up, like, okay, go play Emberwind. It's sort of the opposite of D&D in that way. And, if your players like that better, if they find that easier, if it makes it easier for you to DM, more the better, right? Because then you can focus on doing the actual stuff that you want to do rather than reading rules or creating crunchy combat encounters or whatever it is.
Yeah. So obviously, you both as therapists really go to a big effort to ensure that the game matches the population, some of the challenges and issues that they might be or directly are facing. What kind of feedback, obviously without revealing anything personal, like what kind of feedback do you get from them in that experience in comparison to more traditional methodologies and modalities?
Yeah, I think at least in at our events that are non-therapeutic but still hopefully fun.
Yeah.
The first one we ever ran, I had such a cool experience where we had two students who came from the same grad program, like the same PhD program, but didn't know each other beforehand. And they had a fun time. Like, we ran the game, the grad student Inside Out, overcoming imposter syndrome, procrastination. And as we were wrapping up for the day, it was like Friday afternoon or something. They left together and we're talking and we're like, making connections and plans to like see each other in the common space of their, program building. And I was like, wow, turned to my coworker. I was like, did we just like see a friendship like happen like in real time? Like that's so cool. So that was really rewarding to see, and seeing people just like literally get to connect and sort of bring that connection outside of the space that we created. That was really awesome.
Yeah, I think one of the things I see a lot, because we do groups where there's sort of a play the game and a processing component to it. I think one of the things that we're able to do in that space is to create stuff that's kind of unique for the people that are there and what their goals are and what they want to do. Most often, a lot of the feedback I get is that it allows them to kind of try things out and to workshop some stuff in a way that doesn't really feel quite safe in the real world all of the time, either because the real world is difficult or because they haven't encountered that situation or whatever it is. So I get a lot of feedback of that, of like, hey, this has really helped me because, I was really scared to do this thing. And then, I was able to do it. Like we had somebody that they struggled with being anxious around large groups of people. And so they decided to play a bard, because that's sort of about the opposite as you could go, right? Is congrats, you're the social person, deal with it. But then talked about like, oh, I really took the plunge. Like I've always wanted to be in a theater show, and the campus, this organization was doing it, and I would have never have tried it, but I felt like I could maybe tolerate that experience after I practiced it a little bit. And then I went to the audition and said, what would my character, the bard, do in this situation? And like, oh, they would probably just show up and just, act like it was normal, right? And that unlocked something for them that now they've been in a bunch of shows now, and they are part of a club that does these things. And, I'm not necessarily directly taking credit for them being in musical theater or anything, but like, if that's something they wouldn't have felt safe and comfortable doing, maybe they would never have done it, but because they got to practice a little bit, because they got to experience it, it allows them to maybe be closer to that person that they wanted to be, or try a thing that they would have been afraid to do.
Wonderful. So, for all the clinicians out there who might want to kind of incorporate role play games into their either group practice or maybe just in a more kind of warm, opening kind of experience, Megan, like you were talking about, it doesn't necessarily be therapy, but it could be therapeutic or cathartic or just welcoming.
Just
We're
fun.
Yeah, or fun. I forgot. We have fun. Like, again, that's the reason why these games work so well, because first and foremost, they're fun. And if something's fun, then it's an opening for all the other stuff that will come through. So, like, anytime you might have played like a serious game or something built for like a goal, it oftentimes is not really fun. These things are very much fun. And with the right people involved, they can bring out, direct a kind of therapeutic experience. But for clinicians out there, where do they get started? Obviously, we want them to come to the Tabletop Scholars Conference.
Yes.
Cheap. That's a plug. It's a plug, but it's true. You will be there presenting on this.
Yes, both Will and I will be there sharing our findings and experiences on how to do this. So totally come to Tabletop Scholars.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's what we're here for. Is I think everybody has to start somewhere. I always talk to people about sort of, if you're already a clinician, or if you're trying to be, you already have the skill set that is necessary to do this. It's not that it's, either one of us is like especially talented in some way that you aren't. Um, and also, if you know how the game works, like those are the two things you need to do. The rest of it is just actually knowing, like, how would I set this up and who would I work with and those kinds of questions. But that's relatively easier, I think.
Hmm. And there's also, I think now, I've attended several, and have also been a presenter for several like CE or sort of academic presentations around this like growing topic of using games in mental health spaces. So those are options if you can get your job to pay for some conference travel potentially, hopefully, right? Or write it off on your taxes. I don't know, right? And also, I think there's like a lot of power in just like reaching out to people who are doing it. I know at least in Baltimore, so I'm in the university counseling center space. I think there's a bunch of counseling centers in the Baltimore area, and at least three that I can think of off the top of my head are doing D&D group therapy at their counseling center. So there are people doing it. There are people in private practice settings doing it. And so I think a lot of academics and people, hopefully in the helping professions, are inclined to help, or at least point you in a general direction. So reaching out and making a connection can be the foundation.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And there's so many theoretical orientations to look at that kind of support
Mm-hmm.
this. There's so much empirical evidence, research that you can look towards. Obviously, stuff that's online, stuff that you both have produced, stuff that at the conferences, and colleagues. There's so many wonderful colleagues out there that
Mm-hmm.
again want to meet with you, sit down with you. BoardGameAcademics.com. We have a wonderful network of great people. Will, your organization as well, your nonprofit organization, to connect counselors as well. Maybe we can talk a little bit about this, and just to let you all know that you'll find Megan and Will's information for contact and organizations in the show notes as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you set me up for that one, because I realized later I totally blanked on whatever I was supposed to say earlier. But one of my primary roles that I do now is I'm in charge of a nonprofit organization called ProTag. We're a professional organization for therapeutically applied gaming, which is why it's ProTag, because it's long. But our whole thing is, trying to support the art, the people that want to do it, the research, the, creating a sort of big tent for everybody to be on the inside of and collaborate and talk to each other. Because I know part of my experience has been, when I started my group, I found a flyer from a group that was somewhere way far away in Texas that had run several years ago, and it was like trying to decipher an ancient document. to like figure out like what did they do? What kind of therapies was it? I don't know.
Yeah,
And it was cool. It was an experience, but it was hard. And it was sort
yeah.
of like the experience of being your own little group of people, like trying to figure it out and struggling and doing all of that. That's not that necessary anymore. There's a lot of people doing it. And a lot relative to when I was starting, of course, but there's a lot of people and they're generally very cool people that are willing to help and guide you in the right ways. And, I happens to me too, right? Like there's a lot of things that I pick up from folks that are like, oh, I never would have thought of that. Like a friend of mine that I met at PAX was the first time I interacted with this person, and I knew their name, small
Mhm.
community, but talked to them, and they were like, the way I think about this is it's a vehicle, not a destination, right? Whatever kind of thing you're trying to do, this can get you there the same way as any other kind of therapy. And I was like, oh, that's actually really smart. I hadn't thought about it that way, right? And that's the cool part is I think there's a lot of enough people out there. You can find somebody that's your speed that you feel connected to. And that's the hope is that we all build each other up and make this a little easier to do and easier to start and keep going. And also for people to find us should they need us.
Yeah, 100%. And I think now more than ever, a lot of people out there who do want to connect and especially are dealing with social isolation. And you both can talk about that pretty extensively. Like this is an psychologically an epidemic that's currently happening in a real serious way that honestly needs to be addressed. And people's fandom obviously helps them reconnect, stay attached, understand, learn more about each other and of
Mhm.
themselves. So role playing games as that kind of processing area for a lot of people is incredibly helpful, but also for clinicians to understand clients better and for the younger populations too that they have maybe grown up on, culturally very different. We might have looked at, traditional religious or religious therapeutics. Now we have more fandom based stuff because again, it's the archetypes that really resonate with the people out there, and fandom's so big right now. So if you have fandom as a way to reconnect and reestablish kind of personhood in the world, but also again dealing with the social isolation because of technology and politics and everything else that's happening, clinicians should look at that, right? Well, like that's a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. My dissertation was on extreme social isolation, and my dissertation collected data during the pandemic lockdowns, which was incredibly fortunate for my dissertation, but incredibly unfortunate for everyone else.
Sure.
Um, but I've talked about this so many times with other people, sort of the loss of third spaces and
Yeah.
the loss of those social places you did stuff. And I think in a lot of ways, those spaces are digital now, but also the things you care about, the stuff you like, becomes a potential bridge to creating a shared space with people. And I think in a very literal way, tabletop games, especially tabletop RPGs, do kind of create, so that magic circle effect, but it is a sort of third space in and of itself. And that's why one of the things I always tell people is like, I think the world does a lot of work because it's a literal place that they exist, even if it's only sort of metaphorically and even if it's really only digitally. But, people connect to this kind of stuff. And like, I can't tell you how connecting it feels sometimes. Like, I just watched this thing. I would love if somebody else just watched this thing and I could hear how they feel about it, right? In a way that felt very much like how we used to exist. I remember growing up early days of the internet where like that was maybe what you had, or like so and so watched this thing and now they're going to tell you about it and now you watch it and now you feel connected to them, right? It feels very reminiscent of that, just maybe in different methodology.
Yeah, I mean it's very true, and I think it's very more important now than ever. And Will, you talked about that, I guess, internal or interconnective third space, because so much of technology right now, more than ever, is giving us curated experiences of reality, right? Highly curated by some sort of algorithm AI, and just being like, hey, this is the way the world is, just like this because of something you filled out when you were 12, or you watched 3 videos in a row of the same thing, therefore that's your thing now. Where RPGs give you the opportunity, or games or play in general gives you the opportunity to explore and also to be disappointed in a safe way, which is also fine.
Mm.
Because sometimes when you realize you don't like something, that's also tremendously helpful and informative. And a lot of times in life, at least again, algorithm based, it tells you that's not a thing you want. It should be curated out. It should be, refined away. Just like, no, you should try things because you never know what things might work. And if it didn't work for you, awesome. But also that helps you make decisions about who you are and the world around you. And we have less of that. Well, Meagan and Will, thank you so much for joining us here this week. You can find, again, more of their information as show notes to connect with them, Will's organization, and the research and presentations that they have done. Until next time, please check out boardgameacademics.com for more information about the conference and everything else. The Academic Journal is certainly something you should know because, again, a lot of that role-playing, clinical kind of stuff that's there is also in our Academic Journal, which you can check out, and always gives you great benchmarks and ideas to move forward to the future. So until next time, keep rolling and thinking critically. Take care.
Bye.